Hello and welcome to Wednesday in Parliament. Our look at the best of the day in the Commons and the Lords. On this programme, the special relationship between the US and the UK is intact, says the Prime Minister.
We will be continuing to build on that special relationship. That was very clear from the conversation I had with President-elect Trump.
Peers ask, aren't identity cards a vital protection against fraud?
We will inevitably end up having to have a card, whatever we call it, to enable our people not to lose and have stolen their own identity.
And our cup runneth over. MPs say wine produced in the UK can compete with the best.
We must have our English wine here. We really must.
But first, a week has now passed since the triumph of Donald Trump in the US presidential election. Since the day of his victory, President-elect Trump has made appointments to some senior posts in his new administration and has met the outgoing US President Barack Obama. One of his other surprise early meetings was with the interim leader of UKIP, Nigel Farage, who's been well ahead of any official British contact with the newly elected president. At Prime Minister's questions, the outcome of the presidential election was raised several times, twice by SNP MPs.
Mr. Speaker, many people in this country visit the United States every year to study, on business, or simply to enjoy one of the greatest countries on earth. Can I ask her what action she would take if the new President-elect carries through on his campaign promise to discriminate against our citizens on the basis of their religion? And will she give a commitment that the special relationship that she believes her government has with the US presidency will be conducted on the basis of respect for the dignity of all of our citizens, irrespective of their race or religion?
Yes, I'm happy to say to the honourable gentleman that the special relationship we have with the United States is very important, I think, for both the United States and the United Kingdom. We will be continuing to build on that special relationship. That was very clear from the conversation I had with President-elect Trump shortly after his election as President-elect. But we, of course, want to ensure the dignity of our citizens. It is up to the United States what rules they put into place in terms of entry across their borders, but we will be ensuring that that special relationship continues and continues in the interests of both the UK and the US.
During the election in the United States, President-elect Trump stated that Britain shouldn't be at the back of any trade queue, but should be at the front of any trade queue. Now he is elected president. What action will her government be taking to ensure that the already very good trading conditions between the USA and the United Kingdom further improves?
I think we now have an opportunity in a trading relationship with the United States of America. That is something on which, at a very early stage, I want to be discussing with President-elect Trump.
Can the Prime Minister confirm or deny if there have been any official conversations at any level regarding giving Nigel Farage a peerage?
Well, all I can say to the honourable gentleman, I'm afraid, is that such matters are normally never discussed in public.
Theresa May. While Jeremy Corbyn didn't raise Donald Trump or Nigel Farage with the Prime Minister, instead the Labour leader probed Theresa May over the progress of the government's plans for departing from the EU. Earlier this week, a leaked memo entitled Brexit Update from the consultancy firm Deloitte indicated there were 500 Brexit-related projects underway in Whitehall, and civil servants were struggling to cope with the workload. Mr Corbyn said the memo was highly critical of the government's plans as he read from it.
No common strategy has emerged, in part because of the divisions within the Cabinet. If this memo is, as the Prime Minister's press department says, written by ill-informed consultants, could she put the government's plan and common strategy for Brexit before Parliament?
Well, I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, yes, we do have a plan. Is to deliver the best possible deal in trading with and operating within the European Union. Our plan is to deliver control of movement from people from the European Union into the United Kingdom.
Well, the word doesn't seem to have travelled very far, Mr. Speaker, and I have to say I sympathise with the Italian government minister this week who said about her government, somebody needs to tell us something, it needs to be something that makes sense. Isn't the truth that the government is making a total shambles of Brexit and nobody understands what her strategy actually is?
Of course, those in the European Union who we will be negotiating with will want us to set out at this stage every detail of our negotiating strategy. If we were to do that, it would be the best possible way of ensuring that we got the worst result for this country. That's why we won't do it.
He quoted the memo's estimate for extra civil servants.
And overall expectations of an increased headcount of between 10 and 30,000 civil servants. If that estimate is wrong, can the Prime Minister tell the House exactly how many extra civil servants will be required to conduct these negotiations? Her ministers need to know. They are desperate for an answer from her.
Well, I repeat for the right honourable gentleman, we are doing the preparations necessary for the point at which we will start the complex formal negotiations with the European Union. What I have done is set up a department for exiting the European Union, and my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, the member for Horton, Price and Howden, is doing an excellent job there in making those preparations. But I have to say to the right honourable gentleman, from the confusion that he's got on his benches in relation to this issue of Brexit, it's yet another example with Labour where they talk, we act, they posture, we deliver. We're getting on with the job, he's not up to the job.
I'm sure that there's a question that's vexing not just the First Minister but the whole of Scotland. That on the 22nd of June of this year, Ruth Davidson stated to those supporting Leave they won't tell us what they want to replace the single market with. Now that the Prime Minister is part of a government dragging Scotland out of the European Union against its sovereign will, could she answer Ruth Davidson?
And on the 23rd of June, the people of the United Kingdom voted to leave the European Union, and that's what this government will deliver.
It is right that the Prime Minister has latitude to enter into negotiations with the EU. However, the Vote Leave campaign were very clear that the rights of EU citizens would not be affected if this country voted to leave the EU. My parents are Italian. They've never naturalised and they've been in this country for 50 years. Can the Prime Minister assure me that she will never instruct me to vote in a lobby to take away the rights of my parents and millions of EU citizens?
I recognise the personal passion with which my honourable friend raises this issue. I want, intend and expect to be able to guarantee the rights of those EU citizens who are living here in the United Kingdom. But I also want to see the rights of UK citizens living in European Union member states being guaranteed too. As I've said previously, I would hope that this is an issue on which we can come to a position on which we can discuss with my European colleagues at an early stage.
Theresa May. Well, before Prime Minister's questions started, the Brexit process was also coming under scrutiny at the first session of a new committee, given the title of the Exiting the European Union Committee. The think tank, the Institute for Government, was one of the organisations called to answer questions at this first session. The committee chair, Hilary Benn, went straight to the point.
Yesterday we read what one external consultant thinks about the government states of preparedness, and the Institute for Government has talked, as I understand it, to quite a lot of people involved and has made some pretty trenchant observations about, it's talked about existential threats to government departments because of the challenge they've got, and the process externally appearing to some people as somewhat chaotic and dysfunctional. So I wanted to begin by asking you, Dr. White, how do you think it's going? And in particular, do you think that civil servants involved in this process have got A, the direction, the political direction, and B, the resources they need in order to undertake the task?
I'm actually very pleased to be here this morning because it gives me an opportunity to highlight something I'm sure you'll some of you may be familiar with an element of misreporting by the Times this morning. We have not actually said that there is any existential threat to any government department.
Right.
We were
That's
reporting
helpful.
that as having been said to us. And what we said in our blog yesterday, which has been picked up this morning by the Times, is that we didn't recognise the numbers. We don't know anything about the provenance of this memo, and there's been a lot of speculation about that online. But having been out and about in Whitehall in the past weeks and months, talking to lots of people in lots of different departments, also talking to people outside government who have been trying to get their voices heard within government, we do recognise some of the pressures which are reflected in that memo, which are being experienced by Whitehall.
A leading Leave campaigner wondered if the Brexit process couldn't be simplified.
What if I were determined simply to leave the European Union, to trigger Article 50 and to conclude the bare minimum required to leave? What would Article 50 actually require me to agree? So, for the purposes of this question, I'm not worried about transitional arrangements. I'm prepared to take the economic hit or secure the economic benefits of not having a transitional arrangement and being outside the single market and outside the customs union. I simply want the divorce on the quickest possible terms. So what do I need in that quickie divorce?
Mr Gove was told there was certainly no quick fix solution to the issue of EU nationals living in the UK.
We have no record of how many EU nationals are living in the UK. And there are various options which have been mooted, and I think there's been quite a lot of agreement that those who've been living here a long time should be given a right to stay. But there's a lot of problems about how to actually prove that an individual's been living here for a long time. If you're an academic, you'll have contracts, and you can have a paper trail to show you've got that. But if you are a seasonal worker working in a farm in Lincolnshire, some of those farmers aren't so good on the paperwork. And particularly if you're here for a few months, go away, come back, or you've got other jobs, you might go work in France or whatever for a little bit, then go back to Poland. It's very difficult to prove, and the trouble is this is highly resource intensive. If you do a case-by-case analysis of up to 3 million people who are here, the resource implications of that are vast. And so, going to your point about a quickie divorce, the quickie divorce would say everyone who's here on either 23rd of June or on 31st of March 2019 should have the right to stay, irrespective of the paperwork.
How many people do you think we're talking about who fall within this grey area that you're talking about? So if I decided, or more to the point, if the government decided, but if I decided in this paradigm, we'll let everyone stay.
Yeah.
How many people are in the grey area of not having contracts, being seasonal workers, being at the margins? Are we talking about hundreds of thousands of people?
I would guess so. The trouble is we have no documentation because, as you know, we have no record of people coming into the country because we have the rights of free movement at the moment. So there is no record. We don't know. And of course, these seasonal workers will have contracts of employment, just that they might not have it documented, and that's the problem.
But it would be perfectly possible just to say we are perfectly happy to allow these people to stay.
That absolutely, of course, that's for you to make the political call on that.
Michael Gove there acknowledging that point from Professor Barnard. You're watching our roundup of the day. In the Commons and the Lords, still to come, national identity cards. The idea went away. Is it time to bring it back? Opposition MPs have accused the government of backtracking on suggestions that Britain would give a home to up to half the child refugees evicted from the so-called jungle camp in Calais. Labour called its position a disgrace, but the immigration minister said he was proud of the job the government was doing. The issue was raised in the Commons by a Liberal Democrat MP, unhappy about new guidelines published by the Home Office on Monday, which, he said, narrowed the eligibility criteria for children seeking to enter Britain.
The chaotic demolition of the Calais camp, which abandoned some children on the streets, leaves upwards of 1,000 children in basic and temporary care facilities in France. In the days running up to the demolition, the Home Secretary made statements which pointed to the UK offering a home for up to half of the children in the camp. It is not clear how this is going to be achieved, given the criteria published in the guidance documents.
He went on to quote chapter and verse.
Why has the Home Office limited one of the criteria to Sudanese and Syrian unaccompanied children? Why are the Eritrean children excluded? Can the Minister explain why they have chosen to exclude children aged 16 and 17 years old from the eligibility criteria in Calais, given the universal recognition that they are still children and still vulnerable? And given the government's commitment to tackling modern slavery and exploitation at home and across the globe, can the Minister clarify why the vulnerability of these child victims is not included in the at-risk criteria?
The Minister said it was all being done in the spirit of the so-called Dubs Amendment to the Immigration Act.
We are determined to address the most vulnerable children, which are the ones that the Dubs Amendment suggests we assess, and they are the children of 12 and under. Those are children 15 and below whose nationalities are likely to qualify them for refugee status, and those at high risk of sexual exploitation, including particularly the girls who could be potentially trafficked.
The arbitrary dates mean that children who came to Europe after the 20th of March are on their own, whatever their age. It means that children who came to Europe after October the 24th are on their own. Children are at risk of all kinds of exploitation, including trafficking, forced labour and modern slavery. But this government doesn't care. Without a proper asylum process, if it's not comfortable, that's not my problem.
The reason that we do not consider children who arrived here after the 20th of March is quite simple, because we do not want to introduce a pull factor that will incentivise parents to pay for people traffickers for their children to make that hazardous journey across the Sahara, across the Mediterranean, and in many cases end in a watery grave.
Because restrictions appearing in the guidance were certainly never contemplated during the Dubs debates. So my party shares uneasiness about the exclusion of any children at all aged 16 and 17, because of course 16 and 17-year-olds can be and often are vulnerable. So I ask the Minister, is this a hard and fast rule, or will discretion be applied?
The Minister will know that I have supported him and the Home Secretary in the important work they've done to bring the first few hundred children over from Calais and from France, but not on this. Because I remember the debates on the Dubs Amendment, and we did not discuss ruling out 13-year-old or 14-year-old Eritreans on an arbitrary basis. If this was simply priority guidance because we were going to prioritise the youngest children, people would understand. But why is he making this a strict eligibility rules? Can I urge him to think again, turn this back into priority guidance, not eligibility guidance, and to tell the House how many children does he now think are going to come from France, because it sounds considerably lower than the previous numbers that he and I had discussed.
Would my honourable friend like to congratulate Kingston Council on being the first council to call for every council to take 50 Syrian refugees and for already meeting its quota of vulnerable minors? And doesn't that compassionate attitude by Kingston and other Conservative councils show how the honourable lady's comments earlier, her bombastic comments, were both ill-judged and wrong?
Can the Minister re-explain the rationale about not accepting unaccompanied 16 and 17-year-olds under Dubs? And can he provide reassurance that this is not a reaction to his backbenchers are making outrageous demands like teeth examinations?
No, said the Minister. The key criterion was whether or not the children were deemed to be vulnerable. Well, now time for a spot of history. 10 years ago, Parliament passed the Identity Cards Act. This set up a national identity register and meant we were all going to be issued with our very own identity card. Then came 2010. Labour lost the general election, and the Con Lib Dem coalition announced it was scrapping the ID card scheme and repealing the Identity Cards Act. End of the story? Not quite. At Lord's Question Time, Labour peers decided it was time to bring back the whole idea, and one explained why.
Now we have evidence of the availability on the dark web of counterfeit passports, driving licences, national insurance cards, credit cards, credit references, NHS treatment entitlement cards, European health insurance cards, utility bills, work permits, bank statements, and examination certification, all available today on the internet, on the dark web, at a price. Is it not now time that we return to this whole issue of national identity cards? We can't escape this debate any longer.
Well, my Lords, the Noble Lord mentions a number of areas in which there is fraud and counterfeiting, and I'm sure in terms of identity cards, it is no different in terms of trying to fraudulently obtain them.
The Minister accept that they're quite right not to have identity cards for the very reason that Lord Campbell-Savers gives, that all those documents are forgeable. But surely what is needed is a unique number for every citizen, because if a state doesn't know who its citizens are for national security and good governance and everything else, it's not in business. But if it was a single number to which biometrics could be attached, that would be a big advance. We don't need the actual card.
Could the Minister name one country anywhere in the world that those who have either an identity card or one number which equates to their identity has least problems with regards to benefit fraud, immigration or terrorism across the world, completely eradicated it based on those who want to see this form of identification?
Well, off the top of my head, no, I can't.
The greatest civil liberties is not to have your identity stolen. And we have found in the banking world, in other worlds, by having biometric cards that identify clearly who you are, this can be avoided. And they cannot be duplicated easily because they are biometric. It seems an absolute nonsense, and I have no doubt whatsoever the noble lady the Minister may agree with this or not, and I'd be interested to know, that we will inevitably end up having to have a card, whatever we call it, to enable our people not to lose and have stolen their own identity.
Well, I do recognise what the Noble Lord says in terms of particularly identity fraud, and one of the things that we are doing is working with banks, because it is such a huge loss to them in terms of finances, in people fraudulently opening up bank accounts and also fraudulently taking money from other people's bank accounts. The passport now has facial, certainly the e-passport has facial recognition, which is a very good system of identity. But, my Lords, we will not be moving to the identity card scheme.
Lady Williams. Now, before we say cheers, how about raising a glass to the UK wine industry? There are some 500 vineyards in England and Wales, covering 4,500 acres and producing a mixture of still and sparkling wines. Now a plea has been made for more government help for wine producers. In Westminster Hall, one MP said the British wine industry could become a big Brexit success story.
English wine is now of such good standard that our government and embassies are confident of promoting English sparkling wine across the world. So we will hear much more from our Minister, I'm sure. I've even heard on the grapevine, sorry about that, earlier this year that Chapel Down from Kent became Downing Street's official wine supplier. Unfortunately, however, less than 1% of wine drank in the UK is from our shores. So, for a start, let's ensure that the variety of English and Welsh wines are sold in Parliament, government buildings and our embassies, not just in Downing Street. English wine post-Brexit, Minister. I want English wine to be a big Brexit success story.
English wine now is a quality product which has a premium brand around the world and is part of the great British contribution to quality food and drink.
Just examining the size of the vineyards that we have, average are just 10 acres. So they're very small, they're very niche, but this may prove to be a weakness rather than a strength. But we are seeing stratospheric growth. In 1975, there were just 600 acres under vine, and we're now at 4,500 acres, with a doubling in the last 8 years alone. Competitions, as we've heard, are repeatedly rating English sparkling wine as a world-class product.
I have to say that in my area, in the North East and North Tyneside, I haven't noticed any promotion of English wines in the aisles of the stores there. And it might be due to the fact there are no vineyards north of Yorkshire. because it seems that one of the factors that's important in the retail world is the sustainability of the local produce.
This is a potential success story. English wine is no longer a joke. People are talking about it. It is a potential source of alternative rural employment and a good, environmentally friendly land use. Far better, it seems to me, to grow vineyards than to grow ugly things on agricultural land that may have been farmed in other ways in the past, and is a great opportunity for the country. And at a time where many of us may be utterly miserable at global events, that I can think of no better way than to drown our sorrows, than to raise a glass of English wine for those that drink.
Plenty of cheery thoughts about wine. That's it for this programme. Do join me for our next Daily Roundup. Until then, from me, Keith McDougall, goodbye.